Hello coaches, thanks for joining me for this quick webinar on positional development in young players. My name is Tom Turner, I'm the Technical Director for the Ohio North Youth Soccer Association, and I would encourage you, if you have any questions, I'll leave you my contact information at the end. You are more than welcome to contact me by phone or by email, and I'd be more than happy to chat about any questions, concerns, criticisms or witticisms you might have about this presentation. So let's get started. The first thing I would like to ask you is whether you see player mistakes as coaching opportunities, which is more of the traditional, the players you see to make a mistake and you see that as your moment to walk in and offer the correct solutions to what they might have done at that point, or do you see player mistakes as simply checks for their current level of understanding, and every player is going to be different. Every player has different skill levels. Do you use the mistakes as simply checks for understanding to let you know where they stand with regard to their current skill? The big message in this presentation is going to be that playing is fun, that fun is viewed as learning, or is more likely to lead to learning, and therefore learning is playing. So the relationship between playing, having fun, and learning is pretty intertwined, and it takes us on to a discussion of technique versus skill. We have a culture that is very drill based, very much about technique. But when we look at the elements of skill, skill is the application of technique to a tactical situation rather than just executing skill or technique for the sake of technique. There is a tactical context in soccer that informs what the players do. Player actions are things like passing, dribbling, moving. Anything a player does is a player action, but the more it has a tactical context, the more it has meaning to them. And the more that our practice can recreate the characteristics of soccer, which I'll talk about shortly, the more likely it is that the players will transfer learning. I bolded here, why do we really, or how do we really learn? If you think about just going to a typewriter and pushing the key A, or playing just the note A for the sake of playing the note A, they're very different than the street ball game that you would see on the left. They were very different if we start to write. We don't necessarily just pick up a bowl and start putting salt in it. We use the goal of what are we trying to cook, or what are we trying to play, or what are we trying to type or say. So context drives how we learn, and because of our physical education culture, we've tended to look at technique as a prerequisite for play, and in reality most of us start playing and then over time perhaps find some motivation to develop technique. Very different model. So if you look at fundamentals not just as the list on the right, and I've created this chart just simply for early players, just the entry-level players, young players, so it's clearly not all-inclusive. But with the young players, the fundamentals of skill, which is the application of technique, include the two columns to the left. What is the game all about? And I'll come to that in short time too. And then secondly, what are the tactical concepts, primarily support and possession, that help young players move forward and from what typically is a mass to more organized soccer. I think the goal is to try to create more organized soccer in a sense of positional structures, so that there's a better understanding of what they're supposed to do. We have a lot of kids who end up in high school who are pretty much technically and tactically illiterate because they've spent their lives in drills and never been helped to understand the game. So when you think about fundamentals of skill versus technical fundamentals, it changes the concept of what coaching is, and To give a little bit of credence to that, I just recently finished a national survey, it's a study, asking the players what they felt was important for their motivation and their development. So there were over 1,600 responses, came from 20 states. It was about 50-50 split between the boys and the girls. Ages were 10 through 18. And they were split between recreational players, travel players, more competitive players, and all the way up to DA. There was 4 levels that were broken down in total. There was no significant differences between those 4 groups. So the results that I'm going to share with you in the next 5 slides, no significant differences from the recreation players to the players at the top end. Here's what they told us. In the slide on the left, their favor was for structured scrimmages and practice. They want to come to practice and they want to learn more about positions. How does the game work? That clearly is important to them. They would like to play with a way to win rather than just for the sake of playing. Give me some way to win is always more fun than let me just do something. They would like to play in games where they had enough time and space to assess what to do. They also appreciated the coaches who, instead of stopping the game after a mistake, simply responded to a loss of possession by encouraging them to either win the ball back or recover to help their team defend. These 2 slides relate basically to the same coaching method. Are we going to let them make their own decisions, and are we going to tell them exactly what to do? In the first slide, they clearly want to be able to make their own decisions, and in the second slide, they want help on processing the game. So how does the game work? What are they supposed to look for when they're playing so that they can make better decisions? But ultimately, they want to make their own choices. When they make a mistake, there are many coaches who view that as an opportunity to criticize. And that was the purpose of the first slide. If mistakes are simply viewed as a necessary part of learning and a check for understanding, it changes our role as coaches, and it changes the way that we interact with the players, because we appreciate that a mistake is simply an expression of their skill at that point, and if they can't succeed, our job is to try to help them make better decisions in the time that we have to work with them. The slide on the right, they also prefer coaches who coach in the flow. Rather than stopping and explaining, they would prefer coaches who give them information within the flow of the game. That doesn't mean we can't stop. It doesn't mean we can't coach at other times. But it certainly means that we need to try to maintain as much flow as possible, because fun is flow. When it moves, it's more enjoyable. We can still get information across. We just have to deliver it in a different way. The last 2 relate to participation on the left. They clearly want to be in the game, and the implication there for us is, can we eliminate standing in line to the degree that it's possible? Can we get them actively involved in games to the degree that's possible? And then secondly, and finally, this notion of technique. They appreciate that they have a responsibility to develop technique. The other side of that equation is that when they come to practice and coaches don't view that time as time to develop individual technique, that's time that can be used to develop more ideas on team play. And they've clearly told us that they would like that to happen. They're clearly telling us that they realize that they have to do some homework. And so what we do in practice becomes a little different when we view at it as development of game understanding, as opposed to development of pushing the keyboard and pressing A, or just playing the note A. One last piece on before we start into practical examples. The 2 levels at the bottom we can work with. There is just a level of player who probably the young players for sure. The parents have signed them up. They're there with their friends. They're not interested. Their body language tells us that. Their response to what we ask them to do, they don't participate in anything that is a game-like. They don't participate in anything that's one ball, one player activities. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do with those players. The second groups of players, those kids who are at least interested enough to give it a chance, and certainly the kids who are fully engaged, those are the ones that we can work with. Those are the ones that we can help to move forward. I'd like to think I've got a lot of experience in coaching, and frankly, Group 1, I don't know what to do with other than just tolerate them and work with the other kids. So there is a level of motivation that we have to assess first and foremost before we decide what are we going to do with our practice activities? What direction are we going to take the players we have? So if we flew across a soccer field in our Barbie helicopter, and we look down and we would ask, how do we know that's soccer? What is it about what we're seeing that tells us that that's soccer? And these characteristics would be the ideal answer to that. The game's played between two goals. The game's got a direction to it. There's typically two even teams. There's a goalkeeper. I'll talk about number 4 in a second. The game is played on a rectangle with boundaries. It's got one ball. The players know what they need to do to win, and they've got some understanding of what the rules are. Those would be characteristic. What that means for us as coaching is the closer we can get to those characteristics on a regular basis, the better chance that we have players who can transfer learning out of practice and into the games. The big picture in soccer, which was item number 4, is something that our players struggle with. When you ask the players, what's the objective of the game? In many cases, they'll give you answers like pass the ball, dribble the ball. They don't have a sense that the main idea of the game is to score a goal. If we ask them, what do you do when you lose? If they are involved in a drill environment, the answer to when we lose the ball is go back to the line. The real answer is try to stop the other team from scoring and, if possible, win the ball back quickly so that we don't have to work as hard later. In the soccer game, if we can't win the ball back immediately, we just recover as a group and we try to get the ball back so that we can go and score goals. The objective of soccer when we're defending is to get the ball back so we can score. It's not to kick it out of bounds or defend again. The motivation to defend is to attack. So when we first regain possession of the ball, the objective then is to try to score a goal. And if we can't score a goal, then we go and keep it and try to build up to score. So the cycle between we have the ball, can we build up enough to score? Oops, we lost it. Let's not let the other team get a quick goal. Okay, we've taken care of the immediate problem. Let's see if we can win the ball back. Oh, we won it back. Can we go and counter-attack? No, let's just keep it. The game is always about these 4 cycles, or these 4 moments, and the more that we can encourage the players to naturally move between these 4 phases, moments, whatever you want to call them, the more natural the transfer is going to be, and the more they have a context for what they are doing within the game, because their player actions, which I talked about earlier, always relate to the game itself and whether they have the ball, whether they don't have the ball. Within then the game, it gets a little deeper, but there are principles of attacking and defending that are consistent whether we're dealing with young kids or world-class players. Basic ideas: when we have the ball, try to score a goal. Secondly, it's usually easier to either build up or score if we've got some help when needed. And if we've got a way to open up the other team by going and stretching the game from side to side and from front to back, it gives us more room individually to play. And remember, the players indicated that they would like to play in games with time and space. And part of that challenge on our side as coaches is to help the players understand when you're not involved, how do you create space for your teammates, which is these last 2 points, width and depth. On the defending side, if we lose it, the best thing we can do is try to win it back. If we can't win it back, we try to stop the other team from going forward. In the same way that it's better when we've got help, when we're defending, if we can defend in pairs or in threes or in groups, it gives us more chance to win the ball back. So the second principle is having numbers around the ball whenever we can. The last two principles relate to the shape of the team again. If the team moves together from the sides towards the ball, that helps because it closes up space. And if the team moves forward or moves together from the front and the back, that also means less space for the opponents and a better chance that we can win the ball back. So those principles are universal. There are different ways that they are defined and applied, but the basic ideas of how do we pressure the ball, how do we do it as a group, how do we make it difficult for the other team to find space, are the basic principles of the game on a defending side. So let's move a little bit towards the idea of positional play. The top 6 rows deal with the challenges of young players. The first thing that young players have to come to grips with is how to get the ball out of their feet, how to keep it away from an opponent, how to get their head up. Those by themselves are pretty complicated concepts. The next level then deals with the idea of partners. If I'm next and kicking the ball and my teammate is the one in possession, that doesn't help the team. But young players, as you've probably seen, will crowd around the ball, and it's sort of, if it's a 4v4 game, it's 1 against 7. Or if it's a 3v3 game, it's 1 against 5. So the challenge is to get the teammates to move away from the ball so that we can actually pass it, which is the first combination is a pass to a teammate. So after we can get the passing involved to a teammate, the next part is to get the players who aren't immediately around the ball to go away and find their own space. When we get that to happen, we can start to then introduce the idea of positions. And I've got 2 levels of basic positions that I'm going to show you in a few slides. And then the last part of what I would say the individual development piece is this understanding of line balance, which is if 2 of us are in the same area of the field, how do we understand not to do the same job? If we can get those levels accomplished somewhere between 5 and 12, and sometimes it's a little earlier, and most of the time it's a little later, but someplace around 12, by U13, then the coaching can turn to understanding roles within a team and how the team plays. But we have to start off with the basic ideas, which is the purpose of this presentation. In terms of game forms, 1v1 is the clearest game, and if you look at the labels, I've got 1, 2, and 3 aside are typically skill games where players are learning concepts about the games. If we play 4, 5, and 6 aside, they are good positional games, and I'm going to cover those shortly. And then finally, 7v7 and up are team building games. They are games that are designed to help teams play better as opposed to learn. The closer the game gets to 11v11 and the high reality of 11 aside, the more congested it is, the more difficult it is to process decisions. So 1v1 is the cleanest game that we have. There's only one opponent and the reference of the goals, and that's it. Our job as coaches is to figure out what game suits the level of player we have and give them a steady diet of that experience until they're ready to move on. So that's our menu. So let's go into the idea of individual space. I'm going to show you some examples of how these games may be trained, or how these concepts are turned into training games. So in the first one, it's a simple idea. You play the numbers game. Each of the kids has a number. coach calls a number, kids run out, play 1v1 for some period of time, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 2 or 3 balls. They go off, the next player comes in, they rest. Just a lot of 1v1 situations, simple organization, go to a goal, coach starts the game, and easy to manage. Second version of that puts the coach from the sideline into the goal. And on the left-hand side, you see the photograph of the dad with his daughter, and he's holding the bike while she learns her balance. This is the idea from psychology of scaffolding. Typically, adults, or it's akin to the apprentice system for the trades. Older, more experienced people can help younger, less experienced people learn things that they're capable of, but don't do at that point. And once they've developed a certain level of skill, then the scaffold can be taken away. In the normal world of youth sport, and just as in the normal world of society, older people always help younger people learn. And in the street soccer world, it was typically older players helped younger players. And because we've grouped players together in age bands, we've lost the socialization that comes with just age. So using the coach in a goal or on the field, if need be, is a great way to try to improve the speed that players learn and the things that actually players learn. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So same game, but put the coach in the goal, and now we can encourage the players. We can play the ball into the players in a certain way. We can have them run. We can support them in our half of the field, and we can change the dynamic, but it's still essentially a 1-versus-1 game when the two players come together. If we can move on to perhaps U8s, U9s, they can play in goal. They don't need us, and then we can just simply organize as many games as we need to accommodate the players who show up at practice. In this game here, we've got 4 players. So 2 will play, 2 will rest. We play for a minute, we play for 2 minutes, we rotate. It doesn't necessarily matter how they solve the problems, as long as they get lots of experience at solving the problems and they're in a competitive game. So the 2 players at the bottom who would be on technically the white team versus the green team at the top. We've always got ongoing competition, but lots of 1v1. This is a lot less, takes a lot less management than when the adults have to play. You may not have multiple adults, so you do what you can, but if you've got kids who are, say, 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, they can certainly play this game on their own. So the idea of partner space, the picture on the left is typical. They tend to crowd together. They don't really get their head up. With experience, they will. So again, using the adult as a neutral in this game, they play 2 versus 2. The adult makes it 3 versus 2. And because I've got this game playing to 2 goals, there's a good chance that players will run away from us and attack the open space. So the game itself just encourages going away from the ball and going away from the opponents and finding the open goal. Take the adult out, just again 2 versus 2. And again, the management from our standpoint is just simply setting up the games, putting the teams on, making sure they're somewhat balanced, and then just recording the score and checking who won. Simple way to move from the scaffold of the adult to freeing up the kids, letting them make their own decisions and providing for competition. And the younger they are, the more important that idea is, because they don't really process information very well. The partner space idea, when the kids get to perhaps U9, this game form makes more sense. 2 players in the game from each team, 2 players from each team on the sideline resting or the end line resting, but they're actually involved in the game, because the way the game is played is you have the 2 players on the field and their 2 teammates behind them make the game 4 versus 2, but they can only play from their end. the way the game is scored is that the white team from the right would pass into the green team on the left, and that would be a goal. So anytime the ball is played into the ends, if you happen to be on the green team, you would always play to green when your team has possession, but the green team is actually scoring by kicking the ball, passing the ball to the white team. The players on the end can score as long as the ball is on the ground, and by itself that keeps them engaged. Most young kids won't be able to kick the ball that far, but at least it keeps them engaged and thinking, and it also has an impact on how the defending team moves. So good little game, but it's dealing with the idea of partner space moving away. The most challenging part of this game is actually getting the ball in from the ends. If the players in the game itself don't move away from the ball, it's very difficult. Over time, we can get them to move. If we have adults on the ends, we can encourage them to move in a way that they're not standing right in front of us. The younger the kids, the less experienced the kids, the more likely they are just to stand right in front of us. So that's part of the tactical underpinning of this game, and that's again where skill is more important than technique. If the field is too narrow, it's listed as 16 yards. Maybe it's 25 by 20 so that they have plenty of space to run to the sides. That's just an adjustment we can make. So moving on to the group idea, the thought of group space is that if you aren't the one supporting the ball, then you can go away from the game. You go away, and if again the adult is in the goal, we can pass the ball further than a kid, and the players will run away from us in a way that they won't run away from a teammate of the same age. So the idea of group space is just if you're not the closest one to the ball, go away. It may be that you have to come back and play, and so the teammate who was beside the ball, it's their job to go and find a new space, just playing complement to each other. Again, replacing the adult with a player. And one more example of a group space game. We have 3 goals on each of the long lines in the rectangle, and we play 3v3 or 3v3 plus the adult, and they can score in any of the goals, and it by itself just encourages the kids to try to find space away from the group rather than just where the ball is. This game will not work. The better U8s will play this one, mostly U9 and up it will work. The U8s with an adult, maybe, but it's one of those ones the kids need to have some experience. Otherwise they'll get confused by it, and they don't spread out much anyway, so it would be too complicated for the younger, less experienced kids. The ones, if you're looking at the kids in the picture, I'm going to actually show you some videotape of this age group playing. Just by the way they look at the ball and the fact that the young lady's got her head up looking to see where pressure's coming from, those players can play this game. So let's go on to the last part of the presentation, which is about games that teach positioning. And the basic concept in soccer, at least when the ball is with the goalkeeper, and we're always going to use the moment here when the goalkeeper has the ball. The basic idea is to create some kind of a diamond shape to come out of the back. And whether the diamond in this case is made by just one of the players going to the front, or as it gets more complicated by one of the midfield players, that shape really never goes away. There's always the need to create that shape to get out of the back. So the trigger we're using here is that the goalkeeper has the ball, and the game is a game of 4 versus 4. And with the 3 field players, they cannot be on the same side of the field together at the same time. So the forward, who is the player who's in the left, in yellow, in the yellow team on the right hand side of the halfway line, that separates the 3 players. If that player happens to come back, that's not a problem as long as someone takes their place. They can certainly move, they're not locked into those positions. you encourage them to change positions, but it's a simple idea that it keeps space between the back of the team and the front of the team at all times. So if one of the players in the back half moves forward, it tells the other one they have to stay. The team can defend with 2 in the front, as the red team is doing, or it can defend with 1 in the front and keep 2 in the back. That's fine, but as long as the basic rule is not all 3 together, we will get some spacing, and we're starting to develop the idea of who plays in the front or who moves to the front, who goes to the left, who goes to the right. And again, if the adult is a goalkeeper, we can really make this work quite quickly, just by coaching in the flow, by helping the players understand, by not stopping when all 3 of them get in the wrong half together. It's a great little game as long as we don't turn it into a coaching performance. So the second layer then is what you're going to see in the next video. We've added the striker. So the number 8, the number 5, and the number 4, I've added formal positions: a left-sided player, right-sided player, a defender, a midfield player, and a forward. And the black lines are, on one hand, the build-out line, so there's room to play, and secondly, the offside line, which gives the number 9s a reference point of how far down the field they can go to create space. And again, the moment that the organization takes place is when the goalkeeper has possession. And in theory, we can get the 4 and the 5 to move to the side, and in theory, we can get the 8 and the 9 to move to a little further forward. And I'm going to show you on the next slide what that looks in reality, because it always looks great on a 2-dimensional drawing. Here's the reality. This is the fall season. These are U8s, and this is the first time we've been on the field with these kids. We just randomly put a group of kids together and we give them positions, which is basically somebody to play on the left, somebody to play on the right, somebody to play in the front, and the last kid can just basically go and find space, because at this point that's enough. So what you'll see, the rules of the game are pretty simple. Between the 2 goals, the field space is 36 by 24. We have probably 6 or 7 fields set up with adults in the goal. And the scoring is this: if they pass to each other, it's 1 goal, 1 point. If they pass to the goalkeeper, who is an adult, they get 2. And if they score a goal, it's worth 3. Now what you're going to see, again, this is the first few minutes of their first day of playing. You'll see this young man has figured out to go to the side, but he also hears the clock and he hears that's 2 more points. Now my job is to play it away from the traffic on the far side. I'm trying to get the kids to go away from me. It's going to take a while, but she still thinks 2 points pass to me. He does, so now he goes and finds spaces. That's a good example of partner space. She at least is trying to share the ball, but you'll see where the various levels of understanding are part of this game. That was an attempt from me to try to open up the game, but the young man's played the ball to the goalkeeper, and now he's gone to the side. The goalkeeper's holding the ball until he can get players to open up. The fact that she received the ball and played it back is really important. So he's just demonstrated awareness of individual space. He gets the ball, he's got a defender in front of him, he turns around and goes the other way and passes the ball to his forward. Excellent. So I'm now trying to encourage the kids to come and move for me, and if they don't move for me, I'm going to just kick it where they have to run onto the ball. Right, we just let that go, a natural part of the game. So now the coach has played the ball forward to a player who's running. Alright, now I'm waiting for my team to open up again. There he goes. And he's going to decide what, forward or backward. It's going to come back. So now the space is on the other side, which is where I try to play. Now this is a young lady who has not developed individual space awareness yet, so she is going to lose the ball. That was my player, not that young lady there. And so these games are about 6 minutes. We rotate, and again the key moment is when the adults have the ball, because that becomes Excellent. Now it's going to come back this way, and the space is on the other side, and so I play over there, and now we've got players in space. So I have no forwards on my team because whoever's playing in the front hasn't figured out to go to the front. That's okay. If you just look at this as a natural part of learning, and instead of making a scene that the player in the front doesn't understand to go to the front, we simply use that as a check for understanding. That becomes my way of helping them in time. So again, I'm just trying to get them to move, but I don't want to be standing there killing the flow. So at some point, I'm just going to put the ball back in the game and let them figure it out. So our job is to keep score. Now when I got the ball, I want the players to open up. I'm trying to give them a pass that at least they've got some space. I got stuck there, so I just played it forward. And they've opened up on the green team. You can see they're moving for the ball. That's a good thing. Let's see if he plays to the side. He does. And now this young man has opened up. So the fact that you're seeing that young player open his body up and put the ball into space is a really good marker of awareness of individual space. When they have a sense of where to put it, and same thing here, he's let the ball come across him to open up. Excellent. You can see the individual space problems. You can see the idea of just partner space, moving away from your teammate. The group space, my team, the yellow team, there's no group space because the players in the front don't quite get the idea of how to stretch the game. Okay, that's just a check for understanding. And so on it goes. It's a lot less organized than any of these diagrams, but that's the reality of dealing with players, as long as we've got a sense in our mind what we want it to look like. We just spend time trying to move it a little bit forward, using practice games to help, and always keeping in mind that the kids want to have fun, they want to be actively involved, they don't want us shouting at them in a way that that they feel embarrassed about or threatened. So that's coaching. So the last part here is this notion of line balance. Just going back to that game, those kids were U8, so maybe somewhere between 6 and 7, and it was the fall. Adding another player in there would have been chaos because they don't understand this idea of line balance. So when we get to kids who are, say, U9, U10, and have got enough experience and enough awareness of space, the next stage is to put two players in the same line. In this case, it's the two midfield players, the two number 8s. Their job is to not to be in the same space at the same time. In this example, again, with the goalkeeper starting with the ball because it's clean, I'm going to ask one of the midfield players to take a role that's more advanced than the other one so that I can create the diamond in the back. And I can move the second midfield player a little bit further forward out of the way so that we've got space in the back. The goalkeeper at this point can play any of the 4 field players, or any of the 5 yellows, and if they can play forward, that's a better pass than if they play to the side. Why? Because you're closer to the other team's goal. So anything that goes forward and keeps possession is a better pass than one that is safe but doesn't really take any of the opponents out of the game. So this is the last layer of individual development before we get into team play. So other than the little games, the question is, how do we train those? Or how do we train players to be more aware? And the last 3 slides here just simply deal with a basic idea that if we put the game on the field and take one of the opponents out, and we play 5 minutes, and we keep the score, and then we put the red team back to full strength, take one of the yellow players out, and we continue the game for the next 5 minutes, maintain the score from the first 5. So now we have a way to give one team a numerical advantage, but it's still competition. And it's still between the 2 goals. We still have the transition moments involved that the teams have to react to winning and losing the ball. Again, if this is the adults in the goal with the younger kids, it will help. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense to have all the best kids on the same side and not having uneven game because they do like games that are close. So the second game, the 5v5 game, and it's now 5 versus 4. Take one player out, play for 5 minutes, keep the score, change the balance of the teams, continue the score, see who wins. One thing I'll add here is that the player who sits out, excuse me, the player who sits out can rotate with some of the other players because it gets a little tiring if your number's down for 5 minutes. So having the red team in this case rotate freely as somebody gets tired would be just, it may be obvious, but it needs to be said. And then the last game is simply adding 2 more midfield players in here so that the yellow team is at full strength for 5 minutes, and then the red team is at full strength for 5 minutes. The key moment always is when the goalkeeper gets the ball, because now it's a chance for everybody to reset, to find their basic starting positions and have a sense of where they're playing on the field. In the bigger game, there's all sorts of moments that become important reference points, but just for the younger ones, the goalkeeper in possession is a good, simple, clean cue that they can look at and recognize that that's the moment that they have to go and regain their shape. Okay, as promised at the beginning, my name's Tom Turner. There's my phone number, there's my email address. If there was anything in this presentation that you would like to follow up on, feel free to call. It is April of 2020. We are still in our houses in isolation. So there's plenty of opportunity to connect. So more than happy to chat if you would like to follow up. Thank you for listening. I hope we get on the field with the players soon, maybe put some of this back into action. Good luck.